Hi everyone, Christine Harrington here, the Savvy Sales Lady, and I am back finally, all my fault, with the UK wonder in sales that you all have to follow, Simon White. Hi Simon, it's so good to have you back.
Thank you, Christine. Great to be with you yet again. Loving it.
Yeah, and you know, I've had this nightmare going on with this whole cable thing and everything. So I think we finally got it resolved, which is why you guys haven't seen any videos from us. But today we're going to talk about the arsenal that every salesperson should have, and that is questions. So Simon, tell the salespeople, why are questions so important in order to close the deal?
It comes down to something very simple. The better the question you ask, the better the answer you're going to get. And you know, we've got one mouth and two ears, and we've all heard this 1,000 times before. We need to listen more than we speak. So what we do is we ask a good open question, and making sure we ask the right questions, and we listen to the answer, and that's how we learn. We don't learn anything by doing all the talking. So it's about asking a question and sitting back and listening to what the prospect says back to us, and then and guiding them, taking them on that journey where they discover they need what we have. You know, that's what selling's about. So yeah, the better the question, the better the answer.
You know, I want to ask the salespeople that are watching, how many of you actually prepare questions beforehand? Now, I don't mean that, and I hear this in coaching, that, you know, I don't want to be too prepared and sound prepared. I want to be able to shoot from my hip. Have you heard that too, Simon?
Absolutely. But you do need a framework. You need to think about what kind of questions you are going to ask. And I think it's great to prepare. You know, when we go to the cinema, we've heard this about scripting phone calls and stuff as well. If you go to the cinema and you watch a film with your favorite movie star, originally they just got some paper through the post and a big check, you know, for millions of dollars or millions of pounds. And they got a script. And originally, when they started reading it out, they sounded robotic. But after a while, that's when they put that emotion into it. You know, we've all been to the cinema, we've laughed and we've cried and we've been scared. And that is just a script they are reading. And we've got to always bear that in mind, that we get good when we practice as well. But I'm a big fan. You know, write the questions down if you need to. You know, when I sit with a prospect, I'll always have a notebook and I will have it kind of tilted towards me, making notes, because you know a pen is a salesperson's best friend. You've got to write notes. It shows respect of the person you're with as well. And they can't see. I could have all the questions in the world. They wouldn't know. But yeah, I think it's important to have a framework at the very least.
I like that, have a framework. And one of the things that this will help you with, salespeople, is when you do have a framework of questions and you start to feel, first of all, it's a mindset thing. You feel prepared. You're confident going into the call. How many times when you decided to shoot from the hip, did you find yourself kind of stumbling and stammering around for even how to respond and coming up with questions? So that framework that Simon just brilliantly talked about will help you start the conversation, so then you can sit back and listen and uncover even more questions to ask to dig deeper.
Yeah, and it's also a checklist to make sure you don't forget anything that's important. I mean, I don't know about yourself, but I have certainly had a sales meeting, certainly when I first started, but yeah, I think we all make the mistakes going on as well. You know, having a sales meeting, getting back into my car, driving down the motorway, and then thinking, oh my goodness, I didn't ask them about X or Y. And it's because the flow of the conversation, and it was great and it felt really good, but I didn't ask them that key question. And it might have been a question about a qualifying question, maybe about budget or who else is involved in making the decision or whatever it is. But you've got a checklist, at least you can kind of tick it off. And maybe it's just mentally ticking off, but at least you're going through it.
And let's say that you do that. Okay, let's say, Simon, that a salesperson walks out and then they have their Columbo moment, like, oh, why didn't I ask this? Use that Columbo moment as a follow-up reason to stay in touch and to reach back out to them. You don't have to admit that you had a Columbo moment, but what you can do is just follow up and say, you know, I thought about our conversation later and realized that I'm curious about this or that. Whenever you say you're curious about something, that doesn't feel like you're interrogating them, because I've heard that too, Simon. I've heard, well, I don't want to feel like I'm interrogating them. Well, I always start out with, I'm curious about this, or I'm curious about that. Do you do that too, Simon?
I can't believe you said that. I absolutely, you're 5,000 miles away from me. And one of my favorite words to use in sales is curious. I'm just curious. I use it all the time, and I would have definitely have said it already today. I think the key is to balance questions with insight as well. So it doesn't make it all about them giving up information all the time. You're sharing experience of what you've done with other clients and things as well. So sharing your own knowledge, and you're sort of giving a little bit. So you've got that kind of relationship going with them. But yeah, curious. I love it. I use it all the time. I'm so impressed that you do as well. And so I love it.
We're not that far apart, Simon. Just an ocean between us, that's all. I love that. So listen, everyone. Questions balanced with insight. That is really good, Simon. I love that. So what other tips can you give about the types of questions, or maybe this is one of my barometers, Simon, that I know that I'm moving in the right direction. When I ask a question and the prospect or buyer says back to me, you know, Christine, that's a really good question. I haven't thought about that before. Yeah. Or, you know what, let me think about that. That's a good question. That's a good barometer that you're on the right track.
Yeah, absolutely. You're digging deep and you're engaging them. You know, it's not a superficial conversation. They're really thinking about it. As with yourself, you know, we both listen to a lot of salespeople's phone calls. We listen to call recordings, and we critique call recordings, and we both of us will critique field salespeople and such like. And we always say the same things to them. We'll say, you know, open questions will give you information, and closed questions will give you confirmation. And everybody we have on all our training courses will always say that they know the difference between open questions and closed questions, and they understand the benefits of each. And then what do we observe? If you're anything like me, when I observe them, the open questions tend to go out the window. They ask far too many closed questions, and it's very hard to get a conversation going with just closed questions. Equally, you can't get anywhere if you only ask open questions. And I think for me, if when I'm training, I will draw an upside down pyramid, and I'll say open questions is about, you know, getting information. At the bottom of that, on the tip, it's closed questions is confirmation, and in the middle, that's the probing. That's the peeling back the layers of the onion. So you ask a question, you listen to the answer, and then you dig a little deeper. You know, you might say, oh, that sounds interesting. Can you tell me more about that? Or how does that work? Rather than question one, get an answer. Question two, get an answer, because that's when it does feel like an interrogation. So ask a question, listen to the answer, and probe a little deeper. So for example, if you and I on a Monday morning were at the water cooler, you know, in an office, and I said, Christine, how was your weekend? And you went, yeah, it was great, Simon. And I went, oh, good. And I carried on making my drink and walked off. That wouldn't make you feel very, very good. But if I said, how was your weekend? And you said, oh, it was good, thanks. And I said, oh, great. What did you do? And you said, wow, I played golf. Oh, wow. Where did you play? And I started asking you questions about that. Makes you feel important, and it makes you feel, you know, appreciated. And it's the same with prospects. We ask a question, we listen to the answer, and we just probe a little bit deeper. And that's a good tip to go with.
Simon, that reminded me of something. And that is one of the things that I hear in coaching too, is how to balance business questions with personal questions. I can't wait to hear your insights on this, because I'm not someone who, in the beginning of the sales process, wants to talk a lot of personal stuff. I think people's time are way too busy to chit chat about personal things. So I always wait until that relationship is developed down the line before I pull in curiosity about personal stories. Now, I know, there's give and take on this, and some people say, well, you don't want to seem like you're just only about the sale, but that's the wrong mindset. You're there to help solve a problem.
Yeah.
You can't solve a problem if you go down that rabbit hole of talking about their golf game in Scotland. Well, maybe you can, because you're in that area.
Yeah, it's like
How do you feel about that?
Do you call it a seesaw in America? Is that what you call it?
We do. We have seesaws.
Yeah, it's a bit like a seesaw, because at the beginning of the sales process, you haven't built enough rapport. You built some rapport, but you haven't built enough trust to have those kind of conversations. But if you go too far, then you move away. You can risk moving away from the business conversation into more of a friendly. It's a difficult balance to get. Hence the seesaw example. But for me, there's a bit of small talk, obviously, in that first meeting. On a cold call, nothing. It's very business. Yeah. These are the problems we solve. These are the kind of people we work with. Does this sound interesting? In the first meeting, there's going to be a bit of chit chat at the beginning, maybe about the journey to the office, and it's a couple of minutes, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes tops at the beginning of the meeting. As you get further down the process with them, you've had maybe multiple phone calls and multiple meetings, they might share a little bit of with you. They might say, oh, sorry, I'm late. I've just had to drop the children off at school, or that kind of stuff. But then when you start working with them, you might share some more. Certainly, this morning I've waved at a couple of my clients driving past, because most of mine are relatively local to me. But it's difficult. And I think we just have to gauge it and remember that we need to remember that not everybody shares the same kind of personality traits as us. Some are more outgoing, some are direct, some are more reserved, and some people don't want to share. I'm quite happy with my personality style type to share. I'm quite happy to tell people what I did at the weekend or how I'm feeling, but not everybody's like that, and we've just got to gauge the person we're with as well. They might be a little bit more reserved than maybe we are.
Good point, Simon. Good point. Okay, now I want to ask you about appropriate questions and inappropriate questions. Okay. Yeah. What I mean by that is some salespeople I hear believe that when you ask about money and budget, that's inappropriate. How does that work in the UK?
Well, you've got to. Do they have a do they have a problem? Do they want to solve it, and can they afford to solve it? And how badly, how quickly do they want it solved? I mean, we've got to establish those things. For me, asking about budget or any question around that on a cold call, I wouldn't do. The cold call for me is about selling the appointment or selling the meeting. But very early on, you've got to understand not just if they've got a budget, because they might not have one. So if they don't have one, how do they finance a project of that type? What is the buying process? Who has to sign it off? So there's those kind of questions, but no, I think they're very valid. Absolutely, you've got to understand it, because the biggest mistake we make in sales, or one of the biggest mistakes, is wasting our time with the wrong prospects, and usually that's people who can't afford what we're selling. We might think it's expensive, or we might think it's cheap, or whatever. But if they can't afford it, either sell them something cheaper or move on.
That's the same opinion I have, Simon, on the budget. You're wasting your time if you are trying to sell something to a department or an individual that can't afford it, or they have to jump through hoops in order to get it approved. Yeah. And I'm sure you've been through that scenario before where they tell you they can approve it, and then you find out through the stall of the sale that they actually don't have permission to approve it. Which also brings me to the next question. So Simon, tell me, what are some tips you can give everyone watching as far as questions to ask? And everyone, we're talking in generalities here and not industry specific, because the questions you ask will differ from industry to industry. But what tips can you give to salespeople? Maybe one good tip about questions.
Okay, so when we think about asking questions, we were talking about open questions and closed questions. We often think about who, why, where, when, those kind of questions. But for me, the three that I always cover on my training sessions is TED. Tell me, explain, describe. They are such powerful ways of asking questions, but they don't sound salesy.
Will you say that again?
Yeah, tell me. TED. Explain, describe. Yeah, TED. Can you tell me a little bit more about? Can you explain your process for? Can you describe how you currently? They are just great ways of starting great questions, but without sounding salesy. So I would definitely always say to people to use those three. Obviously we'll have different frameworks and stuff, but just around just general questions, ask about TED. Tell me, explain, describe. And I'd also say that asking questions isn't as simple as people might think. There are a lot of mistakes we make. So I would say ask a question and then stop speaking and listen to what the prospect says. So ask a question and then shut up. Use the power of silence. And especially if you're asking a question as part of your closing, would you like to proceed? And then stop talking. The first person to speak loses is a term we use in sales. You can't speak and listen at the same time. That's another important one. Don't interrupt. And one that I hear a lot is don't ask a question and then answer it yourself. I hear that so often when I'm critiquing salespeople. They'll ask a question, and before the prospect's had a chance to answer, or they've half answered it, the salesperson who knows what the answer should be, because they're just asking something specific about their kind of business, they jump straight in with the answer, and you think, what did you learn by doing that? So it's things like that, and I love questions that don't sound salesy. How do you feel about? What do you think about? In your opinion, will this solve your problem? I love those kind of questions. Yeah, I love anything like that. For me, I don't want anyone who goes on any of my courses or any of the clients who I coach. I don't want them to sound like salespeople. I want them to sound like humans, just having a conversation. Where we're trying to solve a problem for a prospect.
I've never heard TED before, so I'm so glad that you mentioned that. I mean, salespeople, don't you learn so much from Simon? Because I do. One of my tips would be, as you said, Simon, you got to sit back and listen. And I believe I said this on another one of our videos, that when you ask a question and the prospect or buyer pauses, don't assume he's finished his thought or her thought. Allow 5 seconds to pass before you have that tendency to jump in because you feel uncomfortable with the pregnant pause. Allow 5 seconds. If he hasn't assumed his thought in 5 seconds, then you can go ahead and ask a question or comment, providing insight on what he said. But why is this important? Because some people, they start talking and they pause to collect their thoughts, and then they start talking again. Well, if you jump in, you interrupt their thought process. That's a mindset tip. And I actually learned that from a psychologist. So that would be my tip.
That is a fantastic tip, and I think when you're counting those 5 seconds, it is literally 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, because 5 seconds will seem so long 5 seconds will feel like 20 seconds when you're waiting. Yeah, but that's brilliant. Absolutely great tip. Because you don't want to be talking over somebody. Don't. Yeah, yeah. Ask a question and then let them answer it. Give them time. Give them space. Don't be as my driving instructor used to say to me, sort of nearly sort of getting on for 30 years ago. He said, Simon, don't be in a rush to fail. So as we'd be coming up to the roundabout, and I'd be on the clutch and the accelerator, getting ready to go, and there'd be lorries coming by, and he said, Simon, don't be in a rush to fail. And I say that on most of my courses is don't be in a rush to fail. Don't rush the process. Just take your time. It'll be worth it.
There's another good one, everyone. Don't rush to fail. I love it. Well, we're going to close up right now. And Simon, thank you so much for coming back. I can't wait till we do the next one. And guys, we've even talked about writing a book. So you never know what you're going to see from us. So stay tuned to the next one. Until the next time, what's that one saying that you've got for them, Simon?
Oh, one saying, yeah. I think it's Ted. Let's just go with Ted. Tell me, explain, describe.
And mine is, sales is a journey, not a quick trip around the block. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Take care.